Welcome in to Vol Basketball Fever, your number one source for discussions about the Vols and Lady Vols basketball programs. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, and check in every week for new episodes of the show, video breakdowns, and more. Now, on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever podcast. I am Nathanael Rutherford, joined by Gene Henley here for another episode of the show. Thank you all so much for tuning in, whether it's on the podcast, whether it's on YouTube. Thank you all so much for giving this show a chance and listening along. If it's your first time or it's your 50th time, we really appreciate you tuning into the show. If you're on YouTube, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. Also hit those notification bell there so you get notified whenever we send out a new video, whether it's a podcast, an interview, or when the season's going on. We do opponent previews and game matchups and things like that as well. And also, again, subscribe to the podcast if you prefer the audio version. Well, Gene, we are not lacking for topics for the episode today. Since we last spoke, it feels like a trillion things have happened. Earlier in this week, I was thinking on Monday or so, I was like, we have some things to talk about. We have, Tennessee picking up Tyreke Key as a transfer. He officially signed earlier this week. You had Yuri Collins deciding to stay at St. Louis. So I thought that's big news. Then Tennessee putting out, it's coming out that they're in the top 6 for another coveted point guard transfer. He's coming to visit Knoxville soon. And then, everything has just happened this week, Gene. The first thing I feel like we need to talk about is the latest bit of news here that just happened literally like an hour and a half, 2 hours before we started recording here on Wednesday night. And that is Justin Powell, who transferred from Auburn to Tennessee for this past season. Gene, he's the latest Tennessee Volunteer to put his name in the transfer portal, at least, according to reports. I think it was Jeff Goodman was the first person I saw that tweeted about it. But Justin Powell, after 1 year in Knoxville, putting his name in the transfer portal, is just the latest Tennessee player to put his name in the transfer portal. Everyone else, I believe, now at this point has selected their transfer destination, except for Andre Tamba. We'll get to Brandon Huntley-Hatfield in just a second. We'll kind of touch on him and where he's going in a minute. But Justin Powell it's an interesting one. He's a guy who we talked about quite a bit when he, came, or I guess announced his transfer to Tennessee last year from Auburn, actually right around the same time last year, was in, I think, mid-late April when he announced he was coming to Tennessee from Auburn, where he played in a handful of games before sustaining a concussion, and then, didn't play the rest of the year for Auburn. Came to Tennessee with, I'd say, pretty high hopes, even though he was, you knew he had the injury. He was basically kind of being, kind of a freshman for the most part coming into Tennessee. Pretty high hopes, I would say, from Vol fans, especially of, what he can do as a shooter, as a part-time ball handler as well at Auburn. Never really quite got it going. We talked multiple times on this show about it seemed like he was afraid to shoot. I don't know if he was in his own head. I don't know what exactly it was, but he ended up playing 30 games for Tennessee, 3.7 points, 1.5 rebounds in those 30 games. He averaged, I want to say, less than 10 minutes a game. 14.1 minutes per game. He did make a start as well. He shot 38% from three, but he only took 2 threes a game because, again, he didn't play in every game, only played 14 minutes, and he just didn't shoot the ball as often as you would have liked. Gene, it's not a shocker to me, but it's also worth noting that, he already used his free one-time transfer to come to Tennessee. So if he stays in the transfer portal and he transfers, he's going to have to sit out a year if he goes, stays in Division I. The only way he could play next year is if he goes Division II or if he goes overseas, which there's been some interesting scuttlebutt about him looking overseas to do something in a pro league or something. So I don't know, if that's going to be, turn out to be accurate or not, but this is an interesting one, Gene, and silly me for thinking that Tennessee was going to have less roster turnover this offseason than the last offseason, because now we're, I think, the exact same number of guys who are transferring off this roster as you had last year. So I guess just the Justin Powell stuff, to me, it's another loss like Brandon Huntley-Hatfield in the terms of what could have been. The potential is there. It just never lived up to it in their 1 year at Tennessee. And Powell had the shooting stroke again in his limited action, shot the ball fairly well from three. It just, he never clicked offensively, and especially defensively. That was the thing you and I harped on so much, was, why Victor Bailey played over him, why even Jemai Mashack got minutes over him in some areas, because Powell's defense was never good. He was probably the worst defender on the team, which on this team, that's not, saying as much as some other teams, because this was just such an elite defensive team. but he probably was, of consistently the guys that played, the worst overall defender on the court at any given time for Tennessee. So it's a loss from the perspective of there's a lot of potential there with Justin Powell, but I don't know. He's one that I'll be intrigued to see where he goes, because if he goes somewhere in Division I, he's got to sit out. So I don't know. It's not baffling, but it's also just kind of another, all right, well, Tennessee's got another spot to go fill now.
Right. And I think first and foremost, I hope the kid figures out just what he wants out of college.
Yeah.
2 schools, 2 years, 2 transfers. He could obviously, we all know he could come back, although it doesn't seem as though that's the case. Otherwise, I mean, like the timing of the whole May 1st deadline, there's been, obviously a ton of kids. I may later in the podcast throw a name that if I was Tennessee, I would keep an eye out for. But I don't know what the kid is looking for. I think I brought this up last week on the podcast that it wasn't like Auburn was that good last year. And I think we're so used to what Auburn's been in these other seasons that we kind of overlooked the fact that, yeah, there was a ton of roster turnover throughout the course of the season. Sharif Cooper and all that. But, obviously the Powell injury, but that was a below 500 team last year. And so I think as a result, you tend to maybe prop some stuff up that, some numbers up and some stuff in terms of just how good some of these kids were. One of their leading scorers last year, I think their 3rd leading scorer for the season, is about to play his last year at UTC. Or 4th leading scorer, whatever it was. I think he averaged 9.5 a game. Powell's on school number 3. Cooper obviously went pro, and we'll see how that works out for him. But yeah, it's a case to me where this kid needs to figure out just what he wants, because it's very easy to get to college and chase something, but when you get to school number 3 in 3 years, you're not chasing something that what's going to be the answer for you, and that's not so easily answerable. Like, I don't know what the answer to that is. I think only this kid truly knows what the answer to this question is, and so I think that's the big thing for me, because at some point for me it does become about more than just simply playing in college. Like, that's obviously what this podcast is about. That's what we're talking about. That's what the whole basis of what fans we all want to do. But when you're in a situation like this, I mean, what are you looking for? Like, what is it? Like, what's the end game, Spence? Like Dan Le Batard said on the first episode of what's that show? Ballers. Like, what's the end game? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And I don't know if he knows that right now, because I think things started off so well in those 10 games at Auburn that maybe you could, I don't want to say be delusional about what you are, but I mean, they ran a lot of stuff through him at Auburn that year. And since those 10 games, he hasn't been anything near that. And so, like, I'll be interested to see what his next step is. I mean, for him to play next season, he'd either need to go down or get a waiver. I don't know what he could use to make himself eligible next season. There's probably a compliance person somewhere that could use something. I just don't know what that thing is. And again, at the end of the day, we're not talking about a kid who's been in school for 4 or 5 years and has transferred twice. We're talking about a kid who's been in school for 2 years and has transferred twice. And be it bad information he's getting or just personal desire to chase something, about who you are as a player. And I get that. But at some point, he's going to have to stick somewhere. And whatever his reasons are for transferring, I hope they're legit, and I hope that they're good. And But like I said, more than anything else, I hope the kid decides and realizes just what he's wanting to accomplish in his college career, because we're 2 years in and I don't think he has a clue.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and that is one that I'm glad you brought up. Is like you said, it's not just that he's transferred 2 times. It's that he's transferred 2 times in 2 years. It's not like you said. It's not like a guy who's played 4 years and now he transferred once. Now he's using his his graduate transfer 50 year to go to another school. This is a guy who came to Auburn as he wasn't a 4-star. He was I think he's a high 3-star, but he wasn't the most highly touted prospect. But had potential. 6'6" wing. Those are always those are nice kind of body types you like to have on the court. Came to Auburn with I think some hope and some potential there. And like you said, played 10, 11 games there, had the concussion, and it just hasn't been the same since. And again, concussions affect people differently, just in varying ways. I don't know how that affected him. That could have affected him in ways that he wouldn't want to talk about, that Rick Barnes wouldn't want to talk about, or maybe didn't. We don't know. That's just my point. It's like we don't know, how that affected him or how concussions affect anybody. So it could be that again, that case, maybe it's just he's not himself still, and he hasn't gotten back to 100%, and maybe that messed with his head in terms of like this past season where he was not, it seemed like he was, I wouldn't say afraid to shoot. It just seemed like he was more hesitant to shoot than I expected him to be, as a guy who is supposed to be a shooter and who was a shooter. And like you said, the offense ran through him for the most part at Auburn while he was playing in there. And then obviously Sharif Cooper came in and offense ran through him. And that year, again, that Auburn was not very good that season either. But again, it does open up another, spot for Tennessee. You now have, we'll get to in a second, both Santiago Vescovi and Josiah-Jordan James are in the NBA draft, along with, Kennedy Chandler. That's your top 3 scorers on the team from last year, Gene. I guess really quickly on that, I mean, I expect both Vescovi and Josiah to come back, but God, I don't want to play the what if scenario, but what if they don't? That's probably for a future, episode, but I expect both those guys to come back next season. If they don't, Tennessee's in a whole world of hurt, but they put their name, or Josiah didn't even make an announcement. Like, it was just announced, of the 283 players who were early entrants that put their name into the NBA draft. It was announced, that he was just on the list. Like, he didn't make a post about it on Instagram or Twitter or anything like that. Not to say that, all the kids who do that are, wanting attention or whatever. That just is Josiah. He just low key and doesn't really use social media very often, except for that one time where he freaked everybody out and said what he said a couple weeks ago, we talked about on the podcast. But I expect both those guys to come back. But right as of right now, I mean, you got your top 3 scorers from last year, technically not on the team, with Kennedy Chandler, Vescovi, and James. But again, I expect 2 of those 3 to come back. I don't expect Kennedy Chandler to come back. You've got John Fulkerson, who finally graduated in his 23rd year at Tennessee. Brandon Huntley-Hatfield, Justin Powell, Victor Bailey, Quentin DeBonge, and Andre Tamba all transferring off the roster, which again, you're basically kind of the same kind of roster turnover as last year for Tennessee at this point in terms of guys who are transferring off. And kind of like last year too, it's been mostly role player guys. Last year you had obviously your 2 star freshmen go into the NBA. This year you have your star freshman go into the NBA. You had Eve Pons graduate and go into the NBA. Fulkerson graduating. I don't know where he's going to go. I'd wonder if he'll go overseas or what he'll do. But I imagine if he wanted to have a job in Knoxville or anywhere in East Tennessee, he could find a job pretty easy. But I think he's probably will stick in basketball. Just will be curious to see if he goes and pursues overseas, stuff. He did that. I can't remember what it was now. He did that some highlight thing that he made a giant dunk on somebody because they decided to go guard him out in the perimeter, which no one has ever done before to John Fulkerson. But the whole point in getting all this is that you have a lot of roster spots to fill, Gene, and you so far haven't made too many additions, but that's fine. We're still it's late April. Like I'll talk about in a second. I think some people kind of started to hit the panic button a little bit earlier this week when some news hit about one of Tennessee's targets remaining at the school, or remaining at his current school. But Gene, before we get to all that, I do want to mention Brandon Huntley-Hatfield going to Louisville. That to me, it's funny. You and I were talking before we started recording the podcast last week, and you said to me you thought Louisville would be a good fit for him. But then we both said, but he's going to Auburn probably, so it doesn't matter. Well, Gene, he's not going to Auburn. He's not going to the SEC. So he's going to Louisville. I guess I would be very intrigued to see how he fits there, what he does there. But why do you think that you said, again, off the podcast last week, that you thought that'd be a good fit for him? What in your mind makes that a good fit for Brandon?
Well, you get a chance to be coached by the best big man coach in the country, in America, Kenny Payne. And, like if you look, there was a time when Kentucky's bigs were feared. And that time has been since. That time was obviously when Kenny Payne was there. When he went to the Knicks, he weren't quite as feared. Like you had Anthony Davis under Kenny Payne, Karl Anthony Towns, just Nerlens Noel, just basically just look at the NBA at All-Stars. And pretty much almost everyone, I think DeMarcus Cousins was his too. They had the other big from Kentucky that year. I don't remember his name, Daniel Orton. I think he got a chance to grab a sip of coffee in the WNBA before moving on. But if this kid is what people smarter than us project him to be, which is a top-notch sort of big, then that's where you go to bring that out of. Again, like it's not a knock on people. It's just, there's certain people who run programs certain ways. Tennessee builds their program from the outside in. They go get their guards, they go get their wings, and then like Vegas is kind of like a throwaway position. Yeah, you get the talented players, but they don't necessarily turn out to be key pieces of what you're trying to build. I'm imagining that Louisville is going to build it from the inside out, which is some of the pieces. I mean, Huntley-Hatfield is a talented piece. I know what I saw last year. I know what everybody else saw. We all have eyes. I'm telling you, if that kid can figure some stuff out, he's going to be a dangerous player. And where better to go than, again, a chance to be coached by a great big coach. And again, you're in a conference that is historically the best or one of the two best in the country. We thought they were down this year, and they had 3 teams in the final 8 and 2 in the final 4. And we all thought they were down this year because Citadel beat Pitt and Furman beat Louisville. And yeah, like, look, you're getting a chance to play in some of these in a league that, Carolina's will supposedly be great. Speaking of teams that built from the inside out, Carolina will supposedly be great, but we'll see what happens with Duke. Some of them, the Syracuse, eventually Boeheim's going to be done there. I mean, like you're just looking around Florida State. You've got some really good programs in that league, so you're going to have a chance to be pushed every single game. And so I wouldn't be stunned to see maybe next year be a rough one for him. I don't know. It is also a second year of college, so at some point you have to expect more out of him. But I also imagine that he could be in a situation where he's developed in a way to where he turns into one of the top players at his position. And I mean, I'm not out here predicting NBA superstar out of him, but I'm thinking that he'll turn into a very productive player at the very least at the college level, and then perhaps from there.
Yeah, those are great points. Kenny Payne himself was a really good post player. 6'8", he played for Louisville back in the 80s. He won a national championship with them as a freshman, but also went on to be a first-round draft pick into the NBA. He didn't pan out in the NBA, but he played overseas for a while and was actually very good over there overseas. But yeah, you mentioned assistant at Kentucky from 2010 to 2020. So for a decade was an assistant at Kentucky and was the associate head coach for a large chunk of those years as well. And like you mentioned, like the post players that Kentucky had from in that decade from 2010 to 2020, you just mentioned like they're guys who were number 1 overall draft picks. There were guys who are still in the NBA and still making waves in the NBA. I mean, Karl Anthony Towns, you just mentioned, like he's a guy who's been a big name this year, especially, but Davis, Nerlens Noel, Cat. I mean, there's all kinds of big men in that decade that he was at Kentucky that, were super successful. And again, I mean, like you said, that doesn't mean that Huntley-Hatfield's going to go and, be the next great big or anything like that. But if there's a guy who can turn him into that, it's Kenny Payne. If there's a guy, like you said, that can get the most out of a post player, it's Kenny Payne. So I'll be interested to see if, Huntley-Hatfield decides to do more back to the basket, or if he's going to still be the, kind of that free that he wanted to be, apparently, reportedly at Tennessee. And, that's why he chose to go ahead and transfer. So I really think you're right. I think it's a really good landing spot for him. And I think hopefully it's what he realized. And it wasn't just like a NIL thing. If it was just an NIL thing, I think he made the right choice in terms of the fit of coaching styles and whatnot. We'll see, because this is Kenny Payne's first time as a head coach too. So we'll see if, how he works as a head coach, but he has the makeup to be, I think, a pretty good head coach, in my opinion.
Let me add this too, and this is no knock, this is no shot. So anybody that listens to this, please don't think I'm taking shots. Can we all collectively quit taking the sourcing of these reports at face value? I say that because there's sometimes when I read things that are out there, and I try not to, maybe because I understand this industry, it always becomes very one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we read about these things that these kids are supposedly saying and these kids are supposedly doing is obviously coming from a coach on the staff. So therefore, who stands to lose? It's the players who aren't allowed to really say anything, because if they post something, everybody's immediately in the comments talking about, well, you're not going to get this, you're not going to get that at the next school, good riddance and all this and that. And I'm not comfortable with that, because I do know, again, I'm sorry if I'm out here, pulling up the cart. I mean, I don't want to do this thing where I spend all my time taking every report about a kid's attitude in practice, a kid's mentality, what the kid wanted. Maybe the answer in a lot of these cases is right smack dab in the middle in terms of what these kids truly wanted. But because the kid's in the portal and we're not hearing from them anymore, now we're only hearing what one side is saying. And usually that's the side that's going to say something to benefit themselves. Because, because obviously what we know is this stuff is not coming from Brandon Huntley-Hatfield's camp. Because I doubt that Huntley-Hatfield people, whatever you want to call it, would say, yeah, we think he deserves 30 minutes a game. Because I don't think there's a person out there that thinks that in Huntley-Hatfield's, group that would think that would look good or sound good from him. So obviously it's coming from the Tennessee side. Fair, foul, right or wrong. I'm sorry. I feel like we should, we're all a family here when we do these things. And I feel like we can have these conversations at a family. And I just don't like what we've done now, where we take a report, treat it as gospel, and then immediately say, this is what this kid wanted. This is what this kid wanted. It's great fodder. It's great for us to discuss if that's the case. And that's what Nathanael and I will do in these cases. But I think taking it as gospel and kind of using that as an indictment against the kid as to why he'll never make it, that I'm not fond of. Now, when we can say, yeah, maybe the kid was thinking, essentially the kid thinks he's a better player. And I don't think that's a surprise. I think that's just watching the games. The kid thinks that he was probably not utilized. That's what I saw. That has nothing to do with the minutes per game stuff. That has nothing to do with what position. I just felt like he was raised in this game as a different player than what he was at Tennessee. That goes without saying. That just maybe comes from just a small amount of knowledge, just having had a chance to see him play in some AAU. And that's fine if we want to have these conversations, but when this conversation is over, when this podcast is over, I'm not going to be getting ready for bad thinking. Huntley-Hatfield, man, 30 minutes. Does he really think he deserves 30 minutes a game? The nerve of him. And I think that there are people who will take that and will, yeah, we can laugh about it. here, but I think too many people are taking that as gospel and running with it, and you treating that as an indictment on the player. And I think that's maybe a step too far. It's information because the guys who do that job up in Knoxville are great guys, and they've got their source and they've got their people, and that's fine if that's what they want to do. But I'm just not a fan of us taking the word of coaches and not even giving an 18-year-old kid who doesn't know what he's going through, who doesn't know what life is going to be like for him, treating that as gospel. Because I know, if my son is fortunate enough to play basketball in college, he's 17 now. If 2 years from now he's trying to transfer to another school, and I'm reading reports about what he wants, and I know that's false, but I can't say anything, then I'm getting ticked off. So I just don't want to do that. I want to give these kids the same sort of respect that I would want given to me and my family in this time.
Yeah, there are two sides to every story. Like you said, and we usually only hear one side of it until maybe it's years later. And I think a prime example of that to me, I don't always go back to this when talking about kind of the complexities of it not always being black and white, is in 2016 with Jalen Hurd on the Tennessee football team. There was so much of a narrative for a year or two, or maybe longer than that, of only Tennessee side of things, of Jalen Hurd quitting on the team, of of him being the quitter, of him being the bad guy, and of all fans hating on him. And some fans still hate on him and still don't like him. But that view has softened a lot. Oh, maybe not a lot, but it's softened on him because as the years have gone by, more information came out. He's done a couple of different interviews, when he was at Baylor, and stuff too, about his side of the story, where it wasn't just what Butch Jones and that staff were putting out there to make themselves look better, but that, he talked about the concussions, he talked about the injuries, he talked about how he was lied to basically about how he's going to be used in the offense. And then they, showed him some promise of one game at the bowl game, and then came back next year and used him the exact same way they always had been. And then he had a concussion. He didn't feel like he should be out there, and he shouldn't have quit mid-game like he did, and maybe leave mid-season like he did. So, I'm not, again, this is not a football podcast, but I'm not excusing what Hurd did. I'm just saying that there are still two sides to every story. He didn't handle it the way he should have, but he's also like a 21-year-old kid. Like, we all make mistakes. I don't think we should all be held, unless you've murdered somebody. I don't think you should be held, to what you did as a 21-year-old for the rest of your life. And I'm not comparing Brick Barnes to Butch Jones. I'm not saying they're doing the same thing that staff did, but you're right, Gene. Like, there are two sides to a story, and sometimes even more than that. And in this case, we've only really heard one side of it, and some of it's outlandish. Like, I don't even think that some of it's come directly from coaches. I think some of it's been exaggerated by message boards or by other people or whatever. But you're right. Like, regardless, I think what it boils down to is what you said. He felt that he was a better player than what he had shown on the court, and that he could show it if he'd been maybe given more time on the court, or maybe a different position. And that wasn't what the staff wanted, wasn't what the staff thought, how he best could serve the team. So he's moving on. It's a totally different story with Justin Powell too, is that, that's a totally different subject, but you're right, Gene. Like, and that's what I think you and I hopefully do a good job of trying to do that on this show, of not just reacting to whatever headline, not just reacting to the one side of a story. We try to make sure there's nuance and make sure we discuss it. Because like you said, I like to think of, this is a community. We literally have a Twitter community on Twitter of Vol Basketball Fever on the communities tab there. So like, I like to think of this as a community where we can have these type of discussions and be frank and say, hey, this really is only one side. Me personally, I've missed it. I've not heard anything from Brandon or his family or anybody involved with him on their side of this. And like you said, sometimes they can't speak on these things for other reasons. So yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Like, you seem like you want to say something, so like you say that before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say there's not many industries. Sports is the only industry where we side with management over labor. And
yeah, you're right.
it's the one time where, imagine being at work and management is telling other people about your job, and you're like, that's not what happened at all. But everybody's believing that side, and that's essentially what we've done. But no, look, as it pertains to Powell, the only information that we have is that the kid is in the portal, and sometimes it doesn't have to be more than that. Like, it doesn't always have to be like, sometimes people will form their own narratives, but there's sometimes where you just don't necessarily have to help them form it. And and what's going to happen obviously is Huntley-Hatfield is going to go on. He's going to play a role wherever he's at. He's probably not going to play 30 minutes a game next year, folks. He's probably going to play like 20. Can he be productive in those 20? I think sometimes let's say you're dealing with an 18-year-old kid, and an 18-year-old kid who I do think has some maturing to do. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to do the thing where we start throwing a bunch of details that could make it look worse, especially when the kid's obviously not going to defend himself. So, I mean, we'll see what happens with the kid. But right now, I'm actually more concerned about Powell. It's because you are, like I said, you're talking about 2 years and 2 years in college, getting ready to go on year number 3 with no degree. Obviously there are kids who've been, like I said, Chattanooga just got a kid who played at Auburn 2 years ago, who's on his 4th year, but he's graduated from college. He had 1 year of eligibility left. He had a relationship with one of the new assistant coaches in Chattanooga, and it's a good spot because he's got the COVID year. He's got a degree though, and so I think that's a little different. But when you're just chasing, this is college, man. These are 4 or 5, or in this day and age, 6 of the best years, or 7 in some cases, of the best years of these kids' lives, because eventually you're going to be out here in this real world. And guess what? This real world ain't all that fun at times. And so, like, this is a time where you can just find a spot where you can just be happy at. Take time to make this decision. I sound like Justin Powell listens to his podcast. If he does, man, shout out, man. Appreciate you listening. Long time, first time, long time. If just take the time to make the right decision, so you're not in the portal again next year. If that means going out of the SEC, going to like a UT Chattanooga or Furman or somewhere along those lines, to where you can get the sort of attention that you want, or that you crave, or you desire. Because I said this much, and you brought up Josiah, and we can move on. It's very interesting that Josiah has put his statement. I mean, I guess it just came out today or yesterday, but man, that's something that you thought would have come out a little bit earlier.
Yeah, Barnes mentioned it like, when they talked to Barnes, I remember when it was now. It was right around not too long after Vesky had put his name in, and Barnes said at the time that he more or less said Josiah is doing it. Like, he didn't say that he had put in there, but he said that he is doing it. So they knew it was happening. But you're right. Like it's very Josiah that he didn't announce it, but it is still kind of weird that there wasn't an announcement, I guess.
Yeah, when we report this stuff, like, I said, I mentioned the kid from Chattanooga, Malachi Smith, just put his name in the portal today. That's not the name I mentioned earlier that fans should actually keep an eye on.
I would love to get Malachi Smith to Tennessee.
Yeah, I got a better one for you that I'll mention at some point. But it got announced, like it was big news today that kid put his name in the portal. Well, it's because he has to. He's currently in the NBA draft. He's getting feedback about his draft prospects, but he has to be in the portal by May 1st. Or he has to go back to UTC. Okay, since I've already said it a few times, I've teased it twice. Keep an eye on Ben Shepherd from Belmont.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw that name out there. He may not go. I've heard from some people, I guess, I don't know, relatively close, whatever you want to call it, that I'm trying to tell people that becomes a top 3 player in the portal. And that kid would have been a top 3 player in the portal had he gone in March, in April, in May, whenever. I'm just telling you, that's a 6'6" wing player who I'm guessing was probably one of the leading scorers at Belmont, if not the leading scorer. He's athletic, he's tall, he's fast, he can play, and he's got good size. So that's just a name. I don't know if there's any. There may not be any meat to that. He may not go portaling. I know right now, if he does go portaling, that there is at least one SEC school that will be interested, that is trying to get in front of the game, get way out in front of that. And that is, I mean, I won't give you anything else, but yeah, like the timing of a lot of this stuff is interesting. And that's one thing that I just like to keep an eye on. I mean, when kids decide on April 27th or April 28th or any time over the next 4 days, that's interesting, because usually these decisions are made in February and March and April, 1st of April, not now at the deadline. Because if you do it at this late in the game, you're not going back. Kids who do it in mid-March, they could easily take their name out. The Collins kid from St. Louis, put his name in 2 weeks ago, and then decided he was going to go back. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, Tennessee fans, but these things are always a possibility, and I think he'll be fine. And I think that the kid that you're going after now is just as good, if not better, and probably a better shooter. So, but yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of rambling. I said the Huntley-Hatfield thing is unfortunate. We'll see what happens with Powell. We'll see what happens with Hunter. Congratulations on Tyreke Key.
Yeah,
Tyreke. Next year it's going to be rough.
Yeah, that's a good transition, because that was going to go ahead and mention Key, but to kind of circle back to, there was something you said there that I was going to circle back to before he got to Key, and I don't know what it is now, but yeah, that was another big piece of news that happened since we last recorded. We talked about last week's mailbag episode. We were asked about, Tyreke Key, Yuri Collins, and Julian Phillips, kind of the big three that Tennessee had been pursuing. Well, Tennessee get one of the three, and one they're still pursuing, and Julian Phillips. And that whole thing is, he just visited, but we won't go ad nauseum about him right now, but I was giving an update. He visited Auburn. Looked like he apparently had a good time. He did an interview, but apparently wasn't as blown away as, some kids are after Auburn visits, or maybe he's really good at hiding his feelings in interviews. But I think Tennessee is still right there with Auburn. But again, Gene, we talked last week. I'm going to have to believe it before I see it with him. And his recruitment has really made no sense to me. It's been kind of all over the place. So I don't want to have a feel on it. So I don't really want to comment, I guess, too much on it. But Tennessee is still in the thick of things with him. Yuri Collins, we'll talk about him in a second, staying at St. Louis. The guy Tennessee did get was Tyreke Key, who is coming from Indiana State. Of course, did not play last season. I'm hopeful by the time you're all listening to this that I will have a podcast out not too long after this one, where I speak with someone who covered Indiana State over the last few years and got to watch up close in person Tyreke Key for 4 years at Indiana State. Trying to get Tyreke on the show. We'll see if it happens. He does not use social media very much, so I don't know if he'll get back to me and or anything like that, but I've reached out to him and see if he would like to come on the show. So we'll see if he hops on and I'm able to get him on interview. But Gene, in his 4 years at Indiana State, he was a really good offensive player, really good shooter, had a shoulder issue that he again had to have the surgery on. That's the biggest hang up for me, is how does he bounce back from that, the shoulder issue that he had. It's not like, again, like I said last week, it's not like the Lamonte Turner issue. It was not the same injury or some kind of deal that he had, but it was an issue where you saw his 3-point shooting drop off significantly from his junior to his senior year at Indiana State, where he, as a sophomore, shot 44.8% from three. As a junior, 38.9, which again, it's a drop off from 44, but still 39% is really good 3-point shooting, especially in college. But then as a senior, it dropped down to just under 32%, as a 31.6% from three. But again, his points per game actually went up from his junior year, because he's also a pretty solid 2-point shooter, Gene. He shot 55% from two as a junior, almost actually 55.5% as a sophomore, just under 50% from two as a junior, and then as a senior, 55.4%. So I'll go back to that, 55.5% like he did as a sophomore. So he's a pretty good 2-point shooter, and he is exceptional at drawing fouls. He averaged over 5 free throws per game, basically all 3 years that he played outside of his freshman year. 80% free throw shooter as well. Looking at the kind of the advanced stat stuff on KenPom, he was consistently in the top 100, top 200 most years, or close to most years, in fouls drawn per 40, and also kind of at free throw rate as well. He was really high up there. So he's a guy that did a really good job of drawing fouls, of getting to the free throw line. He attempted over 100 free throws, actually well over 100 free throws every year. But in this freshman year, he attempted 88. Gene, he would have, this past season, he attempted 117 free throws in just 23 games for, I guess, this past year, the year before last, in the COVID year, actually, he attempted 117 free throws in 23 games. That would have been number one on Tennessee's team by a long shot. Tennessee didn't have a single player attempt 100 free throws this year. Kenny Chandler got close. He had 99. So, okay. Yeah, basically, Kenny Chandler was the only guy, and Vesky had 92. But, what? I mean, yeah, Tyreke Key. Yeah, Tennessee didn't have a single guy get 100 free throw attempts this year, which is kind of crazy to think about. But Key is, again, I like his game defensively. I haven't seen too much of like defensive film of him, but he doesn't have a bad defensive box minus or box plus minus. It's kind of average, I guess, overall. But I like the pickup, Gene, and I think as we kind of talked last week about it, in terms of like looking at how you kind of judge pickups right now, he's basically, to me, the replacement for the spot that Victor Bailey Jr. leaves behind. And assuming that he has recovered from that shoulder surgery and can be even serviceable, can he be a 33 to 34% 3-point shooter, which, that's not asking too much, but can he do that? And can he still be a guy that goes and draws fouls and gives you 20 minutes a game? I think that's an improvement over Victor Bailey. And I like this pickup. I think he is a bigger body type of guard who can be, the bigger two, or I guess kind of bigger two. He's a 6'3", 205. Maybe he plays the 3 and you move Josiah to the 4 as well, and see kind of how that works out. But I like the potential there. Again, he's also a Tennessee native, played for Salina, and played for Clay County High School, was a star there for Clay County High School as well, but decided to go to Indiana State, where he, again, scored in 4 seasons. Gene, he put up 1,600 points for Indiana, actually 1,650 points to be exact, for Indiana State. So really good scorer. And again, hopefully the injury wasn't anything too significant, but 17.4 points, 15.6 points, 17.2 points. Those are what he did in his 3 years after his freshman year. So I like the pickup. It's really going to be contingent on how he bounces back from that shoulder surgery and kind of what his role is going to be on the roster. But again, Tennessee's had so much turnover now that there's plenty of minutes there to be taking for the taking, as kind of like we said last week.
Yeah, it was always going to be a case of who was going to get him. And it's interesting how much things can change in a week. We didn't know about Powell. I think it was mentioned. I think I maybe alluded to, we'll see what happens at that position, because a lot of bodies. And I could see in the case of a kid like Powell, he's just looking around. He's like, come on, man, you essentially brought in my replacement. And that's welcome to college basketball. This kid's been more productive in college than you have. I'll be interested to see just what this kid's role is, especially as the roster starts to, kind of set itself up. I mean, Tennessee still has some more work to do. Maybe not necessarily at that position, but they still have some more work to do as far as that roster. And, the question is just, can he make himself one of the 8 or 9? That production, those 4 years at Indiana State, really have very little significance on right now. Could he be a kid that maybe averages 9-10 points a game? Perhaps. Will he give Tennessee, mark this on April 27th, he will give Tennessee a 20 to 25 point game. And I think it'll be in a game that matters, to not UTC or ETSU. I think he'll have one of those games, because, kids like that have been through battles and wars for 4 years and are finally getting that chance on this stage, usually have a moment like that. So when he has that 20 to 25 point game, in January or February next year, when you and I are sitting there having this conversation again, I'll just remind you, this was going to happen. But I like, I think we talked about it, we alluded to all this stuff last week. It's a nice pickup. He's got some nice advanced stats. I was just glancing at him a minute ago. Will be, he's always had a decently high, like, let's get nerdy for a second. He's always had like a decently high usage rate.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty high last year. Well, his last healthy season, at 23 point, or I was his PER, his usage was almost 26%. And having the ball in your hands that much, that's a lot. That's a quarter of the time that you that's over. That's literally, I think I saw some of that stuff with Powell too. You certainly hope that he's an upgrade from Powell / Bailey. But it's an adjustment. I mean, he's never had a usage rate of higher than 18.5%. And that's going to be tough for him. I do think it's going to be tough for him this season. But if he can figure it out and he can be productive, then you've now just obtained a shooter and a kid who has produced in the highest levels of college basketball. Not against like all the top competition, but he's produced, and that's all you can really ask for. And by the way, his usage rate would be similar to that of Josiah-Jordan James. His worst season at Indiana State, that's how much he had the ball in his hands. His worst season. So imagine, that's, Josiah had it a fair amount. And I think that's about what his worst season was. So that kid's used to playing with the ball. He's not going to have that chance. So can he fit himself into the role of just being a straight up shooter? And if he can, how good can he be at that? Because that'll determine just how good of a pickup this is.
Yeah, and I've been looking at his numbers and stuff on KenPom, but what his stats were versus Tier A and Tier B teams, which is basically I guess top tier. So I think Tier A is like top 25 schools or something like that in the KenPom rankings. And he hasn't been bad in the Tier A games throughout his career. In the times that Indiana State has they played stellar competition, especially the last 2 years where he was there. Or I guess really the last 3 outside of his freshman year when they played the Tier A and Tier B teams. Looking at what KenPom says, Tier A and B represent top 50 and top 100 opponents respectively, adjusted per game location, so for road games, neutral site or home games. So top 50 is the Tier A, and then top 100 is Tier B. So he's performed well in those games. And of course, Tennessee's schedule will be a lot of that in the SEC. So it wasn't like he just beat up on a bunch of, smaller schools and stuff. And also the Missouri Valley Conference where he's coming from, that's generally a pretty solid conference. That's one that has Louisville, Chicago, who's been really darn good the last few years. Northern Iowa has had their moment in the sun where they've been pretty good over the years as well. Missouri State's had some times where they've been good. It's like they've had some, there's been good schools in the MVC over the last few years.
And they're adding Belmont and Murray.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're going to be, they're consistently one of the better, group of, mid-major schools. That's what I'm looking for. My brain just decided it was going to go into football mode for a second. They're consistently one of the better mid-major conferences out there. And they played some pretty decent non-conference teams too. They played Dayton and Louisville a couple years ago. They played Auburn. They played Purdue. I think they played Auburn. They for sure played Purdue. The year he got hurt in the COVID year. I guess not hurt, but the year in the COVID year, they played them again. They played Louisville. They played Dayton. They played TCU. They played someone else, Colorado, UNLV. They played TCU twice, actually. That's interesting. And then, his freshman year, they played Auburn. So that was a different Auburn team, but they played Indiana, Auburn in that year as well. So played some good teams throughout his time, not just MVC teams, but also a lot of the Missouri Valley teams he played. Those are also pretty solid teams. So I'll be looking forward to talking to the writer who got to see him firsthand and what he did at Indiana State, and kind of if he knows anything about where his recovery from the shoulder surgery will be. But Gene, we already mentioned it too, that earlier in the week, Tennessee, we talked about it being Tyreke Key, Yuri Collins, and Julian Phillips being the big trio for Tennessee. And we felt good about Tennessee getting two of those guys with Key and Collins. And then Collins goes in and makes the announcement that he's going to be returning to St. Louis, takes his name out of the portal, I guess also is out of the NBA draft consideration, and is going to stay at St. Louis. At the time, I saw a lot of people freaking out saying, oh my God, I can't, what if we only add BJ Edwards and Tyreke Key? This has been a disaster of an offseason. Look at all these transfers. We needed a point guard. We can't get this guy. Where are we going to go next? And I thought, guys, we're in mid to late April. Like, it'll be okay. There's going to be some more guys here, even the next week, who put their name in the transfer portal because of, they can, because May 1st deadline is still not here yet. Hold off. And it wasn't like a large contingent, but there's enough people where I was like, it'll be okay. Like, there's plenty of time left. This is, unfortunately, for people who don't like turnover, this is more or less going to be the new norm for college basketball, and especially in April, where there is a lot of roster turnover for basically every school. Not every school is going to have the same amount that Tennessee has had the last couple of years, but a lot of schools are going to have 4, 5, 6 spots open up because of people going to the NBA, because of people transferring out. Well, Gene, not too long after I guess maybe a day or two after the Yuri Collins stuff, people had their moment to discuss and debate and freak out over it. Tyrese Hunter, who is a transfer from Iowa State, a point guard, who is the Big 12 Freshman of the Year for Iowa State last year, dropped his top 6, and Tennessee was in it. And it came out shortly after that Tennessee is one of the 3 schools that he's going to be visiting. And this is a kid who, you mentioned it, like as experienced as Yuri Collins was, I thought he would have been a really good distributor. Again, led the entire college basketball Division I in assists last year, also led it in turnovers. But I was a little worried about his shooting because he seemed like a Severe Wheeler type, but at a smaller school, and also shot the ball less than Severe Wheeler did. And I was never super, super impressed with Wheeler's offense. He could do some things, but Collins seemed like a little bit more of a limited offensive player than what even Wheeler was. However, Tyrese Hunter, I like, not like he's going to be a guy that is going to be, like Kennedy Chandler can drop, 15, 20, 25 points on you in any given night. But Hunter's a really skilled player. As a true freshman, again, was Big 12 Freshman of the Year this past year, 11 points, basically 5 assists per game, 4.9 assists, 3.5 rebounds as a kid who is 6 foot 178. So, basically Kennedy Chandler out there grabbing 3.5 boards, dishing out 5 assists, and scored 11 points per game. Not an incredible 3-point shooter, 27% from 3. Not an incredible free throw shooter either. I think about, just under 70%, but not a bad 2-point shooter. And his defense, very good. I think his defensive the box plus minus is a 3.7, which is really good, especially for a true freshman. He's a guy who I think, I think Tennessee has a pretty good shot. I believe I saw where they sent their coaches to visit him this week. And also, again, he will be coming, I believe, this weekend to Knoxville. If it's not this weekend, it's the next weekend, that he's coming to visit Tennessee at some point. But he was a highly rated prospect coming out of high school. Again, the Big 12 all freshman team, Big 12 Freshman of the Year. I think he would be a very good pickup for Tennessee. And I think you said it already earlier, Gene, that I honestly think he would be a better pickup than Yuri Collins if Tennessee gets him. Again, that's an if, because I don't know that Tennessee would even be considered the leader for him at this moment in time. But I think Tyrese Hunter would be a great consolation prize for Tennessee for missing out on Collins. But honestly, I think he's a higher ceiling, maybe even a lower floor type of guy than Collins, because Collins he'd been in college basketball for 3 or 4 years, and you kind of knew what you'd get from him. Hunter has a lot, still that he can develop, but he also could be, what if he peaked already as a freshman? But I don't think he has. But I also, by the way, average 2 steals per game, which again, that's what Kennedy Chandler got you too. Him and Sakai were both guys getting 2 steals per game last year at Tennessee. Point is, Gene, people were worried about Yuri Collins after he went back to St. Louis. And now all of a sudden you have this point guard who is, I think, widely considered one of the best point guard prospects that's been in the transfer portal so far this year. Again, doesn't mean Tennessee is going to get him or anything like that, but a big name to watch, and one that I am very intrigued by that Tennessee is looking at.
Yeah, and you have to like the upside.
Yep.
More than anything else. I mean, he's giving you 11, 5, and 3. Can't shoot. That can Hopefully he's got a stroke that can be developed.
Mm-hmm.
Like I haven't seen the shot to know if it's just in need of just some, just some work, or if he just can't shoot. Like you look, and if this is the perfect sort of kid for a Barnes program, because I think he appears to distribute it well. He'll guard from 94 feet, and that's huge. Like he seems willing to compete, and that's big. Doesn't necessarily care too much about scoring, because he obviously didn't shoot a high percentage. Didn't make half of his 2-point attempts. Didn't make barely made 25%. Barely made a fourth of his threes, and didn't shoot a great percentage of lines. So doesn't necessarily care about scoring, but he it's good. It's good to have that aspect. It's good to have that that element to your game. But this kid, just looking at the just raw numbers, not having seen the kid play for a second, just seems like a tough-nosed point guard that looks like he's obviously not afraid to go in there and get bloodied up a little bit and get dirty to fight for the team. And he's an intriguing person in the portal, just because it ain't like Iowa State is Indiana State. No knock on Indiana State. It's just usually your freshman of the year in a good league, you don't leave. And I don't recall Iowa State losing their coach, unless I don't remember their coach
either. To be honest, I didn't really follow Iowa State basketball that much, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I think the last time I remember looking, like Steve Crom, who's back at Murray State again for the second time. I think he may have been the Iowa State coach at the time.
It's TJ Otzenberger. That's who it is. That's right.
He's been there for a while, so
yeah,
it's interesting.
Well, that was actually this past year was his first year there. He was at UNLV before he came to Iowa State.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that he brought Tyrese Hunter in, unless the kid signed and decided to stick through it, whatever. But that's an interesting piece to the portal, just because that's a kid who usually in the league like that doesn't just leave. Maybe he didn't like his development or something like that. I don't know. But usually pieces like that who are productive. This isn't like Justin Powell, who, obviously when he was at Auburn, he was productive, but then he had the concussions, and, they brought in some guys that could kind of take his spot. So he left. He only got 10 games to prove himself, and then they kind of moved on from him because of the injuries. Whereas this kid played like every game last year for an NCAA tournament team, if I recall, and is in the portal. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that's a great piece that you wouldn't expect to be in the portal that you can get. Is he in addition? Is he probably better than Collins? I'd say so, just because of the upside. But I can't really judge upside in 2022, considering this stuff is always on a year-to-year plan. And upside is only good if you keep the kids that are in your program.
Yeah.
Tennessee fans should know that more than anybody else. Perhaps more than anybody else in the country, not named Kansas or Villanova, because most of these other programs don't keep kids more than like a year or two. Those two schools in particular seem to keep top level players for 3-4 years. And it's no surprise that those are two teams that are competing for championships every single year. So if you can get them, you get them. It's probably a long road. I guess obviously I would, if I was Tennessee, I may kick the tires on Malachi Smith if you just are determined to get another piece, because that is a 6'4" guard who is eager to prove himself, although I think he's going to end up in the SEC somewhere else. That is a 6'4" guard who is tough and can play, but that's obviously only if this doesn't work out. And plus, Malachi is a little bit different than what Rick Barnes guards typically look like. a lot bigger bodied. His guards are usually smaller. But, I mean, if you can get a kid who averaged 27 and 3 and shot 50, 40, 80 this year, you certainly at least fill that out. But we'll see. I mean, obviously, let's get past Tyrese Hunter's future plans first, because that's a person who you've made enough inroads with to suspect that you've got a chance with him. Malachi is still going to play around with the draft, and we'll see what happens there. But I don't think that's going to happen for him this year. And that'd be a person I would look at if, the second he decides to take his name out of the draft consideration. Although, again, I think that there's a really, really good chance that he ends up in the SEC wearing garnet and black. Whatever South Carolina's colors are, I'm not going to. Whatever their colors are, garnet and black, I guess. That's kind of where I think he's going to end up if he does decide not to not to stay in the draft.
Well, I mean, that would make sense. Look who South Carolina hired. Gene, I'm going to go donate, I guess, to Spire or something. I need Malachi Smith at Tennessee like that. I've not wanted to transfer to Tennessee that bad. I mean, I just don't think there's any connection there. I said that on Twitter. I was like, I don't see this ever happening. I don't even see that there's, a connection there. But like you said, there's kick the tires, do something. I would love for that to happen for. I think Malachi is just a baller. Like he was really fun to watch at UTC this past year. I was really hoping UTC would be able to go on a run in the tournament, because he was the type of guy that is made for that March spotlight. I really like Malachi. So, man, I would hate for him to come to the SEC and Tennessee to play him though. But really quickly, back to Tyrese Hunter. He's the guy who I was also looking at this article on 247 Sports about him. Finished the season with a 32.1 assist rate, which ranked 40th in the entire country. So that's according to KenPom, which very solid especially for, again, a true freshman in a Power 5 conference. Finishing top 40 in assist rate is really solid. He's actually rated right now on 247 as the number 2 rated player in the updated transfer portal rankings. So he's the number 2 player currently in the transfer portal, basically, on 247 right now, which, again, take a lot of those with a grain of salt with the transfer portal stuff. That's, I thought, really cool to see. His top 6 schools, by the way, that include Tennessee, were Texas, Kansas, Louisville, Gonzaga, Purdue, and Tennessee, because of course Purdue. That's a pretty darn good list of teams right there. A couple of blue bloods listed in. I mean, I guess I would consider Louisville, I guess, a blue blood. They're a borderline blue blood, but I think I'd consider them one. Gonzaga has been really, really, really good last 15 years or so. Of course, Kansas is a blue blood. Texas, not a bad program, and Purdue's been very solid over the last decade as well. So, and of course, Tennessee has, Rick Barnes been very solid, and they've had a lot of really solid moments in the last 15 years or so. So he's got a really good list of teams there, and a couple of them still in the Big 12 if he wants to stay in the Big 12. Kind of wrapping things up here, Gene, besides me bugging you about Malachi Smith and me wanting him to come to Tennessee, and I don't unfortunately think it'll happen. Tennessee has also extended an offer to another 2022 prospect who he's looking, Gene, I guess for lack of a better comparison, he kind of is looking like a post-player version of Zakai Ziegler from last year in terms of, again, Ziegler's not the only one that's ever done this, but just for example, for Tennessee, of a guy who is coming on really strong in AAU play, but also make the Ziegler connection because this kid's from the Bronx also, played for Cardinal Hayes, and he's been playing for the same AAU team that Zakai Ziegler played for, the NH Lightning. He's been making a name for himself at the EYBL. I think they may have just finished up, but I've been trying to find stats and stuff for it, but everything I've found is behind paywalls and everything. So I will try to get stats, everything I can. But apparently this guy, Tobe Awaka is his name, 6'8", 240, power forward type of guy, basically a forward position type of guy, has really been lighting up on the EYBL circuit, the AAU circuit lately. and has gotten a lot of interest from a lot of teams. He picked up a bunch of different offers. I think Pitt was one of them. Maryland, I think, was one of them. Maybe St. Joe, one of the St. teams also offered him. Looking at the session 2 day 1 results where NH Lightning played BABC, he finished with 11 points and 14 boards, 4 assists and 2 steals. He's been, I think, averaging basically a double-double in the EYBL. And again, not just like a 10-10, but averaging like 12-14 per game. So he's been like very strongly averaging a double-double for the EYBL or for the NH Lightning. Gene, this is an interesting one to again for the Peach Jam, which again was where Zakai Ziegler popped up on the radar for teams and for Tennessee. He currently holds offers on Rivals, according to Rivals. Well, they have not updated it in a while. Here we go. Pitt, St. Peter's actually, the darling from the NCAA tournament, but Pitt's kind of the big one. But I saw different people. I think Adam Zagoria and I want to say Andrew Slater tweeting out about a lot of the offers he's picked up lately. But again, Tennessee has offered him as well. Gene, I don't know if that'll happen, but Tennessee's got plenty of room. They currently only have one, signee in the 22 class, and BJ Edwards. I think this is a guy to watch out for, and I haven't seen really too much film of his. I've seen a couple highlights here and there. He looks more like the type of 4, obviously, that Brandon Huntley-Hatfield was not. But again, he has the build of a 6'8", 240. He looks a little bit more like the 4 type of player that Rick Barnes likes in his program. And I would expect him to come in and be like Ziegler. It's harder to me, unless you're a true just star, like we were just talking about with those Kentucky players a few years ago, unless you're one of those guys, it's harder to have like immediate success. Like we saw with Ziegler as a true freshman. I would not expect Tobe Awaka to come in and be as the guy Ziegler in the post for Tennessee if he comes to Tennessee. But I think he, is a very interesting option. I think he would be a much better fit for a post player than than some of the guys that Tennessee's tried to bring in over the last few years, like a Corey Walker or like a Brandon Huntley-Hatfield.
Yeah, because from what little I've read about this kid so far, it's not like he's lived his entire existence out on the perimeter.
Right.
This is a kid who is just completely out here, just grinding. I'm seeing him post up, and I just saw him dunk on somebody. I saw some of those stats from the EYBL where he basically averaged 11 and 13. Last weekend in Indy, 11, second team all conference or second team all whatever tournament, 11 points, 13 rebounds, shot 56% from the field. SMU's in on him now. This is the guy that you better get in on. And it's smart that Tennessee's getting in on him because that EYBL circuit is massively talented. Massively talented. St. John's, Pitt, Maryland, Rhode Island's now in the mix. Tennessee's now in the mix. Like, this is all stuff that's happened essentially in 3 weeks, basically. So this kid is, and that's bigger than, because I don't even know if Ziegler didn't get all this in April.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he had that one tournament, August or in July, I should say.
Yeah. He played in the Peach Jam and he got attention by, they're right. I think it wasn't even until later until maybe June or something where he really got the attention.
Yeah. And so you're talking about a 6'8" kid who, he's a 6'8" kid who, understands the assignment. He understands what he's out there to do. He doesn't have like a disillusioned sense of who he is as a player. That's the type of kid who can come in and be effective right away because he seems like he's just a tough, hard-nosed kid. I don't know how athletic he is. I don't know if any of the shots that he took were beyond 5 feet. I don't know, but he made 56% of the shots that he took in Indianapolis this past weekend, and that tells me a lot. It tells me that this is not like Tennessee with Tamba, where it's like we know something that you all don't know, type stuff. Because there was not a single big school in the country that was after Tamba. last year, this year, next year. I know he's a 2022 kid, but none of those schools were like showing that level of interest in him. This is a school. This is a coveted big man late in the process. Who a year ago probably saw none of this happen.
Yeah.
So there's a hunger there. Like that's kind of what happened with Ziegler. There's a hunger that comes there when you go from nothing to everything in the span of one weekend. And when people, talk against like AAU basketball, this is the reverse of that, because this kid, I talk about it a lot of times with life-changing moments. Last weekend was essentially a life-changing moment for this kid, because whether he ends up in Tennessee or not, he did not expect this 2 weeks ago. Maybe he did. Maybe he knew this is the type of player he was. But he could not have imagined. Sorry, I'm a little down as my Bulls just got knocked out. But he could not have imagined that this would have transpired, that long ago. And so if Tennessee can swoop in and get this kid, then you're talking about a kid who, much like Ziegler, is coming in hungry. We may not have the story of Ziegler, but that hunger is no less. And that's kid's going to come in and compete for whatever he can get on the team, where at this moment, it appears they need to do something. Be Olivier at the very least.
Yeah, I was, while you were talking there, and I was listening to, like, I was watching some of his highlights and watching him just attack the rim, and like a lot of his shots were in and around the rim, but like, man, he moves well. He's not just like this big, kind of like bulky kind of 6'8", 240. Like he moves really well. Yeah, and that's again just from watching limited film and stuff on him just now. Like I'm looking on Twitter for film and stuff. Yeah, but like you said, that this isn't just like a guy, like you said, that Tennessee has offered, and it's like, well, like you said, maybe we know something you all don't. A lot of schools are getting on him right now that are needing some big men next year, and some not bad schools like Pitt and Maryland and Rhode Island and whatnot. So I'm very intrigued by Tennessee offering him and seeing kind of what happens with him. Yeah, averaging 11.5 points, 13 rebounds, 1.8 assists, 1 steal per game in the 4 games he played for NH Lightning in the Peach Jam. So I don't know anything with timeline with him at all. I don't even think he has a Twitter. I think most things I've seen mentioning of him are just talking about him. I don't think he even has a Twitter. So, but yeah, that's another name to watch. But Gene, you mentioned Ben Shepherd. There's other names that I've seen Tennessee tied to. I've already forgotten, but there was maybe from High Point. There's another like point guard or guard from a mid-major school Tennessee is interested in. There's also a kid from Oklahoma State I think Tennessee is interested in, who's a point guard, if I remember correctly. Not nearly as many big men Tennessee's looking at, but they definitely are looking to add a guard, of some sort, another point guard of some sort. That's very clear from all the guys they've been pursuing. They want a point guard with college experience to come in next season, even just 1 year, like with Tyrese Hunter. Tennessee is looking for point guard experience next year to pair with Zakai Ziegler, and also bring so that BJ Edwards I think doesn't have to be counted on as the true backup to Ziegler, or that Ziegler doesn't have to be counted on to be the true starter. But again, I think Ziegler, like you talked about, I mean, if he competed with Kennedy Chandler, no matter who Tennessee brings in, they're not guaranteed anything, because Ziegler is going to push them to the limit because of how intense and how competitive that kid is. So I'm very excited for Ziegler next year. Saying all this about these new additions potentially, to me, it's also just only going to further motivate Ziegler. Kid doesn't need more motivation, but he's going to get some for next year. But Gene, we have so much more we could talk about or build on, kind of that we've already talked about, kind of build on it. But I think this is a good spot to kind of end. We'll, I'm sure, have a billion things to talk about next week when we do another episode. Maybe Tennessee will have another addition by then. Maybe there'll be another person leaving or something from the roster. I don't know. But I'm sure we'll have plenty of news next week and just updates on how things have gone with guys who have visited or guys Tennessee's reached out to that are in the portal. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, if it's your first time here, we really appreciate that. you giving us a chance. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. We did a mailbag episode last week. We'll do a couple more mailbag ones here in the near future because it's the off season, and I like hearing what you guys want us to talk about and questions you may have, and us trying to answer them as well. I don't think I said it earlier, but just in case I didn't, the deadline to withdraw names from the NBA draft, by the way, is June 1st. So all these guys, Josiah, Vescovine, yes, technically Kennedy Chandler as well, have until June 1st to withdraw their names to return to college and remain eligible for next season. But again, thank you all for listening. If you'd like to leave a like on this video, that'd be fantastic. It helps the videos to perform well, and it helps our channel perform well as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're here. If you're listening on the podcast, subscribe to us there as well, and leave us a 5-star review. We'd love that, and we'll read it on here on the show if you write out a review as well. Signing off for Gene, I am Nathanael. This has been another episode of the Vol Basketball Fever Podcast. Thank you for watching Vol Basketball Fever. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel while you're here. We appreciate all your support, and the show wouldn't be possible without Vol fans like you. Thank you.